Greetings and salutations, this is Kyllax with my very first episode in my Smite lesson plan. So in this episode, I'm going to be learning the gods. I'm going to be looking at what their types are, what their attack types are, what their damage types are, taking a quick gander at passives, and also a real brief overview of the roles. And this will serve as a building block in order to help me get better at Smite, because how can I get better at a game if I don't know the characters that are playing? So in Smite, the gods are characterized by their type. Now for this lesson plan, and in order to help me get better and learn the gods better, I've broken the types down into two further subtypes. I call them the attack type and the damage type. Now there are two attack type of gods in Smite. There are the melee characters. These are the gods that like to get up close and personal when they do their auto attacks. Some examples would be Thor, Vamana, Bastet. The other attack type of god is a ranged attack type. This is a god that likes to sit back from a distance and shoot you with their auto attacks. Some examples would be Neith, Artemis, and Zeus are all considered ranged types. Now the other subtype I mentioned was damage type. Now there are two damage types of gods in Smite. There are the physical damage type, where all the damage done by these gods is considered physical damage, i.e. Apollo, Cupid, or Anhur are all physical gods. And there's the magical damage type. These are the gods whose damage is considered magical in nature. Some good examples would be Zhonghui, Kronos, and Ares are all considered magical type. So now every god in Smite is unique. They each have their own passive skill, which is something that does not have to be activated, it's just always on, and it aids them in the match. Once again, in an effort to break apart all this information, I created another database to help me memorize the gods' passives as well, which I'll also put up online or via email upon request. Now here are a few examples and basically what their impact on the game is. Example number one is Apollo. Now, Audacity is Apollo's passive ability. And what it does is, after 10 successful auto attacks by Apollo, he will use both of his hands to fire the next 5 attacks, hit or miss, which basically increases his speed of attack by 100%. So as you can see here, right above where his abilities are, there's this little meter for Apollo. Now, as this meter fills up, that counts the number of successful attacks that you've had, and also gives you an idea of when to expect his passive to come into play. Now, it should be noted that Apollo's 3 ability, called the Moves, also fills up his passive meter. It wasn't until the Pagan Gamer pointed this out to me that I realized this, but it is something worth mentioning. Number 2, Ares. Ares' passive is called Blessed Presence. So for every completed aura item that Ares has, he will increase his magical power by 30. Now, it must be an aura item. An example is Voidstone. You cannot get the Focus Voidstone and still get the bonus from his passive. It must be the aura Voidstone. So now Ares' passive is a little bit harder to see than Apollo's because he doesn't have a big meter, but right above his abilities you will see a little Ares icon with a number in it. The number is the number of completed aura items that you currently have, and thus how stacked his passive is. Number 3 is Poseidon. His passive is called Changing Tides. So a movement speed increase and damage increase basically based on how full his tide level is. Successful basic attacks will increase the tide level by 10%, while using his special abilities decreases the tide level. So it should be noted that Poseidon is going to move a little bit slower and hit for a little less damage right after using an ability, as well as he's going to move a little bit faster and hit for a little bit more damage after hitting with some of his basic attacks. And just like Apollo's passive, Poseidon has a meter above his abilities that tells you how full your tide level is. Now the fourth and final example is Thor. Thor's passive is called Warrior's Madness. This is where he gains an additional 15 physical power for every enemy god within 50 feet of him, with a maximum of up to 3. This means that Thor is even more dangerous when it's 2 or 3v1 than if it was merely 1v1. And Thor's passive is just like Ares' passive in that there's an icon right above his abilities that will tell you how many stacks you have. Included on Smite's listing of all the gods on their webpage, there's a recommended role. This is a brief overview of that role and just kind of what that role means. First, we have the Bruiser, now known as Warrior role. This is a physical damage god with potential for high damage or high defense, but not both at the same time. Some examples would be Hercules, Thor, and Vamana. Next role is the Mage. This is a magical damage god with high damage but little to no defense. Some notable examples are Agni, Poseidon, Zeus, and Ao Kuang. The third role I want to talk about is the tank, now known as the Guardian role. This is a god who can absorb a lot of damage, with the flip side being they cannot put out a lot of damage. So if you decide to take a tower or an enemy god as a tank, you might want to bring a sack lunch because you're going to be there for a while. Examples include Athena, Sobek, and Ymir. The fourth role is the Assassin role. This is a god that has the capability for high single target damage, but they're also extremely squishy, which means they cannot take a lot of damage and they die easily. Notable names include Loki, Kali, and Neza. The fifth role I want to talk about is the Carry, now known as the Hunter role. This is a god who has a good late game with the potential for high damage at that point in the game, and it's this capability that ends up carrying the team to victory. Examples include Neith, Apollo, and Xbalanque. Role number 6 is the Support role. This is a god that can heal, buff, debuff, and just generally support the team. Examples include Hel, Aphrodite, and Ra. The last role I want to mention is the Jungler role. Now, this is a god who is generally considered bursty, meaning they can put out a lot of damage very quickly in order to clear a Fury farm, buff camp, and even at higher levels, possibly the Gold Fury or Fire Giant. Notable examples include Arachne, Hebo, and Tyr. So at the end of this lesson plan, I want to have a warm, fuzzy feeling in my tummy about the gods that I can play and just what I can expect from them. So now this wouldn't be much of a lesson plan. It would be against the spirit of this series if I didn't give you my tips and recommendations. So when I first began playing, I ran into the question of which god should I play first? And Ra was originally recommended to me. And I played Ra first. And Ra's kit is pretty simple to learn, and as well as he can be a very tanky character, as well as his heals give you a lot of sustainability, and as a beginning player, that's kind of what you want, because if you die a lot, the game's not going to be fun, and you're not going to want to play it anymore. So in the order of preference for roles for new players, this is my list. I recommend you start with a support character, such as Ra, Hel, Aphrodite. They all have good sustain, and they all help out with team fights, and you'll just die less often. The second role I would recommend is the Guardian / tank role, and it's for the same reason. You can take a lot of damage, and you're not going to die as much as if you play one of the other characters, and therefore I think you'll learn a lot more when you're playing. Plus, it's not really that popular of a role for people to pick in the games because there's not a lot of glory in playing a Guardian and or tank. The third one I would recommend is the ranged AD carry / hunter, because I recommend that over the warrior just because of the ranged attacks that puts you further away from the action. I feel that when I play a warrior anyway, I didn't realize that you had to kind of hug the minions, your minions, and use them as a meat shield against the enemy attacks when you're playing a melee character, until about when I hit level 10, maybe level 12. I'm ashamed to admit. Next one on my list is the Warrior Bruiser role. Now, this is still a role that I'm kind of struggling to master and or pick up, but I feel that it is a role that is less likely to die, and therefore you're going to learn more, and therefore you're going to have more fun in the game. So as I mentioned earlier in this episode, the Warrior Bruiser could take a lot of damage and or put out a lot of damage, but not both at the same time. So along the same lines as the Guardian / tank, you're going to die less often, and therefore it's going to be more fun for you. Right and close behind the Warrior class for me is the Mage class. I've been on a real Mage kick lately, but it's not a role that I recommend right off the bat. These are gods that use their abilities to do a good portion of their damage and a good portion of basically lane clear in anything that they do. Their basic attacks don't amount to anything, so plus the fact that you are extremely squishy and you're subject to ganks. So on the squishy factor, they're not the most squishiest, but they're up there. Second to last on my list is the assassin role. I say that because I'm still at level 29 trying to figure out when and how I can secure kills. Now, if you don't secure a kill with an assassin character, generally within the first few seconds of a team fight or of initiation of a team fight, you're just going to end up dying. So they're extremely squishy. I put them at the bottom of my list because I just feel that if you die a lot, you're not going to want to play anymore. Winning the final spot on my roster is the jungler role. Now, it's at the bottom, not because you're the squishiest and you're the most likely to die, but just because I feel it has the most information to process that a new player is just not going to have experience with. You have to know a route that you're going to go through the jungle. You have to know who should get what buff. You have to know who you can gank, when you can gank them. Just too much information that a new player is not going to know. If after getting some experience with some of the other gods and characters in Conquest, you want to give jungling a shot, I recommend Lost Scarf's jungling guide. Just look it up on YouTube, Lost Scarf jungling guide, and that should get you started. Don't be afraid to try it, but I don't highly do not recommend it for brand new players. So all in all, I hope this gave you a good overview of the gods that you can play in Smite, and just generally what the recommended roles mean. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope to see you in game.